The tragedy of Will Smith is that the world only allows him to be perfect. We remember the brightest smile Hollywood has ever produced. Remember him destroying aliens on the big screen. Remember the cleanest rapper in hip-hop history, the biggest box office star on the planet, the most exemplary family man in Hollywood, a perfect machine designed to never stumble. What we don't see is the 9-year-old boy standing frozen at the top of the stairs, witnessing his father punch his mother to the floor and being unable to move, unable to scream, unable to do anything except stand there and call himself a coward. That wound never healed. It only got buried deeper, beneath layers of muscle, beneath $100 million blockbusters, beneath audiences' laughter and shining awards. Will Smith himself admitted in his memoir that everything the world knows about him, the MC who destroys aliens, the movie star, is mostly a construction, a carefully crafted and constantly polished character designed to protect himself, to hide the coward from the world's eyes. He spent 30 years building the most perfect version of himself. Then in 3 seconds, on the biggest stage on the planet, that entire structure collapsed. The icon once honored by all of Hollywood as the embodiment of absolute success would be exposed on the most glorious stage of his life, not as a legend, but as a human being of flesh and blood carrying a wound that had never been healed. The smile that once conquered every box office in the world never told the full story. Outside the spotlight, perfection became a prison, and that prison had no escape because he himself had built every brick with his own hands. Today, behind the aging face of the greatest entertainer of his generation is a haunting question. How can a man continue to make the whole world believe he is invincible when his own life keeps proving the opposite? Before we look through that smile to find the real person inside, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like for Will Smith. Long before the $100 million blockbusters, before the Oscars, before the night when the most glorious stage on the planet witnessed him collapse, there was a boy in West Philadelphia who believed his father was the greatest man in the world. Willard Carroll Smith II was born on September 25, 1968 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, into a black middle-class family. His father, Willard Carroll Smith Sr., was a former Air Force veteran, a cold engineer and owner of a small business specializing in refrigeration systems. His mother, Caroline Bright, worked for the city's Board of Education. Young Will grew up in a Baptist family, attended Catholic school, lived in a Jewish neighborhood, and secretly had a crush on a Muslim girl next door. A unique multicultural background that early on taught him how to adapt, how to read every room he walked into, and how to become whatever version the person in front of him wanted to see. Friends gave him the nickname Prince because of his smooth talking ability that could get him out of any trouble with just a smile and the right words at the right time. That was his first superpower, language and performance as a survival weapon, and it would take him very far, but it would also hide a lot. Because inside that seemingly normal house, a completely different truth was happening. Will Smith's father was a man full of contradictions. In his memoir titled Will, he wrote that his father was violent, but he was also present at every performance of his son. He was an alcoholic, but he was sober at every premiere of every movie he starred in. He listened to every recording. He visited every film set. The harsh perfectionism that terrorized the whole family was also what put food on the table every night throughout his life. The military discipline his father brought home from the Air Force didn't stop at the barracks door. It seeped into every dinner, every order, every outburst of anger within the four walls that the outside world never saw. Young Will both feared and desperately admired his father, and that very contradiction would dominate every important relationship in the rest of his life, from the way he loved, the way he protected, to the way he self-destructed. Then the fateful moment came. The moment that later Will Smith himself would call the minute that defined his entire being more than any other moment in his life. When he was 9 years old, he witnessed his father punch his mother in the head so hard that she collapsed to the floor. He saw his mother spit out blood, and he did nothing. He didn't run to help his mother. He didn't scream. He didn't push his father away. He didn't call anyone. The boy just stood there, completely frozen, while his mother's body lay on the floor and blood flowed from her mouth. It wasn't a moment when he acted wrong. It was a moment when he didn't act at all. and the guilt from that helplessness would follow him like a shadow for the next 44 years. The boy assigned himself a title that no court pronounced but no words of comfort could erase: coward. And from that night on, everything that boy built, every muscle on his body, every blockbuster on the screen, every round of applause from millions of fans, every dollar in his bank account, all of it was a desperate effort to prove the opposite, to turn the coward into a hero, to build a version of Will Smith that no one could call weak. He himself wrote in his memoir that everything the world understands about Will Smith, the MC who destroys aliens, the movie star bigger than life, is mostly a construction, a carefully crafted and constantly polished character, designed to protect himself, to hide himself from the world, to hide the coward. The boy frozen at age 9 would spend the next 44 years building a man who would never freeze again. But when that man finally acted, it would not be the redemption he had imagined. His parents separated when Will was still a teenager and officially divorced in 2000. But the relationship between Will and his father was never truly broken nor truly healed. It hung suspended between love and rage, between admiration and resentment, like a wound not deep enough to need surgery but not shallow enough to heal on its own. Many decades later, when his father was diagnosed with terminal cancer, Will became his primary caregiver, a bitterly ironic role reversal. One night, as he carefully pushed his father's wheelchair from the bedroom toward the bathroom, a darkness rose inside him. The path between the two rooms passed by the top of the stairs. Since he was a child, he had always told himself that one day he would take revenge for his mother, that when he was big enough, strong enough, no longer a coward, he would take his father down. He stopped at the top of the stairs. He could push him down and easily get away with it. But when decades of pain, anger, and resentment surged up and then subsided, he shook his head and continued pushing his father into the bathroom. His father passed away in 2016, the same year his marriage to Jada Pinkett Smith quietly fell apart. Will Smith lost his father slowly, in contradiction, in care mixed with simmering anger, and never truly reconciled completely. His wound was not that his father was no longer there, but that his father had been there all those years, yet he never found a way to love him the right way. And now he was gone. That opportunity was permanently closed, leaving a void not of absence, but of things that were never said. In 1985, at just 16 years old, Will Smith met Jeffrey DJ Jazzy Jeff Towns, and the two quickly formed the duo DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, a combination that from the beginning bore the mark of calculated choice rather than pure instinct. While most hip-hop in the late 80s was diving into street violence, profanity, and social rage, Will Smith chose the opposite path. Clean hip-hop, no swearing, no guns, no blood, the kind of hip-hop that both parents and children could sit and listen to together in the living room without anyone needing to explain anything. It wasn't artistic cowardice. It was the first brick of the construction. The boy who once froze before violence in his own home now refused to bring violence into his art, and the world rewarded that refusal. In 1989, the duo won the first Grammy in history for Best Rap Performance with the song Parents Just Don't Understand, turning 20-year-old Will Smith into one of the most successful rappers in America. Money poured in like a waterfall and poured out just as fast. He spent uncontrollably, bought luxury cars, threw parties, wasted until he owed the Internal Revenue Service nearly $2.8 million before he even turned 21. That was the first lesson about collapse. Money could come and go, but the fear of returning to zero would follow him forever, adding another layer of fuel to the perfect machine he was frantically building. Then the second door opened, and this door would change everything. In 1990, music legend Quincy Jones spotted Will Smith at a party and offered him a role in a new NBC sitcom. The result was The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, the television show in which Will Smith played a character named Will Smith, a fictionalized version of himself. This strange coincidence was not just an interesting detail, it was the beginning of a phenomenon that would define his entire career. The line between character and real person began to blur from here, and it would never become clear again. Throughout 6 seasons from 1990 to 1996, The Fresh Prince turned Will Smith from a tax-debt rapper into a global pop culture icon. But the most memorable moment of the entire show was not any humorous scene, but the scene where Will Smith cried in the episode Papa's got a brand new excuse when the character's father leaves and young Will asks through tears why he didn't want him. That scene is considered one of the most authentic moments in American television history for a heartbreaking reason. He wasn't acting. He was really crying about his real father, about the 9-year-old boy who had never been healed. The audience erupted. Critics praised it. But the implicit lesson Hollywood taught Will Smith during the Fresh Prince years was more dangerous than anyone realized. Audiences loved him when he was funny, when he was light, when he smiled. Pain was welcomed only when it was in the script, only when it had a director and cameras around it, only when it ended on time to make way for laughter. Real pain, the kind without a script, without a director, that didn't end when the studio lights went out. No one wanted to see. And the boy who once froze before violence now learned that the world only rewarded smiles. With that lesson etched into his subconscious, Will Smith stepped into Hollywood with the precision of an engineer rather than the romance of an artist. He once revealed that he had studied the list of the 10 highest-grossing films of all time, analyzed their common features, special effects, creatures, love stories, and then deliberately chose roles that matched that formula. Independence Day in 1996 became the highest-grossing film of the year, confirming Will Smith as the top summer blockbuster star, the man studios trusted with hundreds of millions of dollars in budget. Men in Black in 1997 built another global franchise and reinforced the image he had painstakingly created: cool, funny, and absolutely safe. Enemy of the State, Wild Wild West. Not every film was a resounding success, but Will Smith was always Hollywood's #1 choice. The first name on every casting list for every summer blockbuster. Then he did what no one expected. In 2001, he stepped into the role of Muhammad Ali in the biopic Ali, the first time he completely shed his humorous shell to take on a historical figure that demanded real acting depth. He gained over 15 kilograms of muscle, trained in boxing for months, and delivered a performance that earned him his first Oscar nomination of his career. The world began to realize that Will Smith was not just a comedian. Behind the smile, there was a real actor with depth that few had suspected. In 2006, The Pursuit of Happiness brought a second Oscar nomination, and this role was more special than any other in his filmography, because it was the story of a single father fighting desperately not to lose his son, to prove he was worthy, to not become a failure. Will Smith wasn't just playing Chris Gardner, he was acting out his deepest fear. The fear of becoming a failed father, like the wound left by his divorce from Cherie Zampino. By the late 90s and early 2000s, Will Smith was no longer just a star. He was a phenomenon without precedent in entertainment history. 8 consecutive films grossing over $100 million domestically alone. At the same time, a best-selling rapper with Big Willie style, Willennium, and the hit Gettin' Jiggy With It that won a Grammy, a legendary television star the whole world called by his real name, and the most perfect family role model in America. Married to Jada Pinkett Smith in 1997, welcomed Jaden in 1998, welcomed Willow in 2000. He founded Overbrook Entertainment, which later developed into Westbrook Inc., expanding his power from acting to film production, televisions, and digital content. There was no single peak moment, because Will Smith's peak was not one night but an entire decade, a period stretching from 1997 to 2008, when he was the closest version to perfection that the Hollywood machine had ever produced. But if all of this was really a construction, if every smile was a brick, every blockbuster a wall, every award a watchtower, then that fortress, no matter how magnificent, was built to hide a frightened boy inside. In 1991, Will Smith went to the set of the film A Different World with the sole purpose of meeting Jada Pinkett, the young actress he had noticed for a long time. But instead of meeting Jada, he met Cherie Zampino first, and his life took a completely different turn. Will and Cherie got married in 1992, the same year their first son Trey was born. But the marriage collapsed almost as soon as it began. Cherie filed for divorce just a few months later, and the process dragged on until 1995. For anyone else, a divorce at age 27 might just be a youthful lesson. But for Will Smith, the man who had built his entire personality on the foundation of never failing, it was a disaster. He once admitted to Jada on Red Table Talk that divorce was the worst thing in his adult life, that divorce was the ultimate failure, that he had been hurt a lot in his life, but nothing touched the pain of failing as the father of his 2-year-old son. The pain didn't stop at the broken marriage. It spread to his relationship with Trey. Will lost regular presence in his son's life, and the most familiar ghost in his life returned, the model of the absent father, the very model he had grown up in and sworn he would never repeat. He believed that if a man was not a good husband, then he lost the right to be a father, a harsh belief he imposed on himself and carried for many years afterward. The relationship between Will and Trey was deeply damaged. He was not the type of dad throwing baseballs with his son in the backyard, but the type of dad inviting his son to build business projects together, and it took many years for the two to find a common language to talk without an invisible wall between them. Then Jada came, the woman he should have met before Cherie. The woman destiny seemed to have destined for him, but made him go through a painful loop before allowing the two to touch. Will and Jada started dating when he and Cherie had just separated but not officially divorced, something Jada herself later admitted she should have restrained more. They got married on December 31, 1997, when Jada was pregnant with Jaden. And from the outside, this was the beginning of the greatest power couple in Hollywood, the Smiths, icons of love, success, and black perfection in an industry dominated by white people. But the truth inside was more complex than any script Hollywood had ever written. In her 2023 memoir Worthy, Jada revealed that she didn't really want to get married. She had cried at her own wedding in Maryland, and her mother had pushed her down the aisle. Jada had said outright that she never believed in traditional marriage, meaning from the very first brick, the two were building the same house, but with two completely different blueprints. They built a 25,000 square foot mansion in Calabasas that took 7 years to complete, with a circular floor plan. Will said the idea was to create an endless cycle representing the love of the two. The image was so beautifully perfect, but a circle, in another sense, also meant no way out. The relationship between Jada and Cherie was initially its own battlefield. In a famous phone call recounted by both on Red Table Talk, Cherie had bluntly told Jada that she was living in the house Cherie herself had chosen, and Jada replied that it was her house now. Will stood between the two women and scolded Jada. He said that was Trey's mother, and that wasn't her place. But over the years, the relationship among the three gradually healed in a way few could imagine. Jada later called the bond between her, Will and Cherie, a non-sexual throuple, 3 people raising children together, sharing holidays, appearing at family events, a complex blended structure that only people who had been through a lot of pain could build. But behind closed doors, Will and Jada's marriage was operating under rules the outside world didn't know until everything exploded under the spotlight. In 2021, Will admitted to GQ magazine that the two had an open marriage, that they had given each other trust and freedom, with the belief that each person had to find their own path, that marriage with them could not be a prison. Then in 2020, August Alsina, the young rapper introduced to the family by Jaden himself since 2015, publicly declared that he had been in a romantic relationship with Jada and that Will had given permission. The storm hit and peaked in the July 2020 Red Table Talk episode, when Jada sat facing Will in front of millions of viewers and admitted her entanglement with Alsina. Will asked, his voice calm but his eyes not calm, an entanglement or a relationship, and Jada replied that she was in deep pain and very broken at that time. That moment, the most powerful man in Hollywood, sitting silently listening to his wife describe her relationship with another man, in front of the cameras, in front of the whole world, was a form of public humiliation that no golden statue, no box office earnings, no construction could compensate for. Jada denied that Will had given Alsina permission. She said the only person with the right to give permission in that situation was herself. And Will later revealed another equally painful detail, that Jada's entanglement was not the only extramarital relationship in their marriage, meaning both had sought something outside the walls of that circular house with no escape. This was not a story of one betrayer and one victim. It was a story of 2 people carrying their own wounds, trying to love each other outside traditional frameworks, in the only way they knew, and hurting in ways no outsider had the right to judge. Then in 2023, in her memoir Worthy, Jada revealed the final truth, that the two had been living separately since 2016, the same year Will's father passed away, but kept it completely secret for 7 years. 7 years appearing together on red carpets. 7 years of joint interviews with the press. 7 years sitting next to each other on red table talk, talking about love and family. 7 years of the most perfect construction, a surface without a single crack while inside it had shattered into pieces. Jada explained that by 2016 the two were exhausted from trying, that both were still trapped in the illusion of the person they thought the other should become. This was the paradox of the legend in its purest form. The man who had turned perfection into a living art was now maintaining the final and also the most painful version, a marriage that only existed in front of the cameras. On March 27, 2022, the 94th Academy Awards, Dolby Theater, Hollywood. This was supposed to be the most glorious night in Will Smith's 30-year career. He was nominated and the strongest contender for Best Actor for his role as Richard Williams in King Richard, the story of a father who sacrificed everything to protect and uplift his two daughters, to become tennis legends Venus and Serena Williams. The reward for 3 decades conquering Hollywood was within reach. But the man sitting in the audience that night carried more than just hope. He carried the weight of everything that had accumulated over the years that the outside world didn't see. The childhood wound that had never been healed. 7 years of secret separation. The entanglement scandal still simmering in every tabloid headline. The pressure to prove he was still the Will Smith the world once loved. And right next to him, Jada Pinkett Smith sat with her shaved head, not for fashion, but because of alopecia, the autoimmune disease causing hair loss that she had publicly shared as part of her courageous personal battle. Then Chris Rock stepped onto the stage to present an award, and before opening the envelope, he did exactly what a paid comedian was supposed to do. He joked. He looked at Jada and said he was really looking forward to G.I. Jane 2, referencing Demi Moore's shaved head character in the 1997 film. The audience laughed, and the camera captured the most decisive moment in Will Smith's entire life. He laughed. A reflexive smile, a smile programmed over 30 years. It's a smile that the construction had trained him to keep in every circumstance. For a fraction of a second, the perfect machine still operated as designed. Laugh when it hurts, laugh when attacked, laugh because that was the only thing the world had ever rewarded him for. Then he looked at Jada, and her face wasn't smiling. Her eyes said something completely different. Not anger, not a demand, but something only he could read after 25 years together. Something that touched the deepest and most dangerous chord inside him. And in that moment, the 9-year-old boy woke up. The boy who had stood frozen 44 years earlier in that bedroom, watching his father punch his mother to the floor without moving, without screaming, without doing anything, then calling himself a coward for the rest of his life. The boy had made a silent vow etched into his bones that he would never stand still again, that when someone insulted the woman by his side, he would act, he would protect, he would prove the coward had died long ago. And now, in front of billions of viewers worldwide, his wife was being mocked about a disease she didn't choose. And he was sitting there, laughing. Will Smith stood up, walked out of the row, went down the aisle through the audience, stepped up the stage stairs, walked toward Chris Rock, and slapped. Not a staged slap, not a scripted punch. A real slap, with a real hand, across the face of a man standing at the microphone on the biggest stage in the entertainment world. Then he turned and walked back to his seat, sat down and yelled, "Keep my wife's name out of your fucking mouth." The audience froze. Chris Rock froze. The whole world froze. 3 seconds. 30 years of building. Collapsed. The ultimate paradox of Will Smith's entire life was contained in this moment. The protective action the 9-year-old boy had waited 44 years for. The vow he had carried from his mother's bloodied bedroom was finally fulfilled. And it wasn't redemption, it was destruction. He had waited nearly half a century to no longer be a coward. And the moment he finally acted, it became the biggest, most public, most irreversible mistake of his entire life. During the commercial break, Denzel Washington and Tyler Perry pulled Will aside, trying to calm him. Denzel said a sentence that Will would repeat many times afterward, that at the highest moment of your life, be careful because that's when the devil comes for you. Will returned to his seat, eyes red, hands shaking, the construction cracked wide open and unrepairable. Then a few minutes later, in an irony no screenwriter would dare write for fear of being called unrealistic, his name was called Best Actor, King Richard, Will Smith. He stepped onto the stage for the second time that night. The first to slap a man, the second to receive the golden statue from someone else. He stood at the microphone, Oscar in hand, tears streaming down his cheeks, and said that love would make people do crazy things. He talked about Richard Williams, about protecting family, about love, and every word he said collided directly with what had just happened minutes earlier. He received the award for playing a father who protected his daughters with love, right after protecting his wife with violence. The role and real life crashed straight into each other. The construction and the real person merged on the same stage, under the same lights, in front of the same audience that didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. That moment, the golden statue in his right hand, the slap still echoing in the air, tears on his face and bewilderment in the eyes of everyone around, was the most condensed image of Will Smith's entire life. Glory and collapse didn't happen sequentially, as they usually do in normal stories. They happened simultaneously, on the same night, on the same stage, just minutes apart. The next day, he posted an apology to Chris Rock on Instagram. Then he resigned from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. The Academy announced a ban on him attending all Oscar events for 10 years, until 2032. In July 2022, he posted a long YouTube video titled "It's Been a Minute," a second apology, this one deeper and more painful. He revealed he had reached out to Chris Rock, but the message back was that Rock wasn't ready to talk. He apologized to Chris Rock's mother, his brother Tony Rock, and admitted that this might not be fixable. He said his behavior was unacceptable and that he would be here whenever Rock was ready. The world was divided. Some sympathized, believing he acted to protect his wife, but the majority condemned it. And Hollywood, the machine that had once created the legend of Will Smith, began to turn its back systematically and mercilessly. Will Smith had no one to blame. No one pushed him onto the stage. No one held his hand up. No one forced him to slap. The construction wasn't destroyed from the outside by enemies or fate. It collapsed from within, by the very hand of the person who had built it. The man who had spent 3 decades perfecting the art of being loved in 3 seconds had given the whole world permission to stop loving him. The first film released after the slap was Emancipation, a project Will Smith had finished filming before Oscar night, a film about a slave escaping to find freedom, produced with a $120 million budget, and Apple buying the distribution rights for $130 million. In any other circumstance, this would have been a prestige project, a potential Oscar contender, a step forward in the serious acting career he had pursued since Ali and the Pursuit of Happiness. But when the film had limited theatrical release to qualify for awards, it only grossed a few $1,000s per theater on opening night, a disastrous box office failure whose cause wasn't in the film's quality or performance, but in those 3 seconds on the Oscar stage months earlier. Emancipation was completely shut out of the 2023 Oscar awards race. Not because it wasn't good enough, but because no one in the industry wanted to put Will Smith's name next to the word Oscar anymore. Many other projects were frozen or quietly canceled. Fast and Loose disappeared from the production schedule. Roles that previously he would have been the first choice for were now given to other names without explanation. Hollywood insiders told the press outright that everyone had always thought Will Smith had issues, but after the slap no one wanted to work with him anymore. That he was extremely controlling and had anger issues, that it was very hard to see his career recovering. The construction didn't just collapse, it was systematically dismantled by the very system that had built it. Hollywood is the machine that creates legends, but it is also the machine that knows how to erase legends when legends no longer serve commercial interests. And Will Smith, the man who was once the safest box office asset in the industry, now became a risk no studio wanted to bet on. But amid the ashes, the first signs of reconstruction began to appear. Slow, quiet, not as glamorous as at his peak, but carrying a different kind of persistence. In 2024, Bad Boys, Ride or Die hit theaters, the 4th installment of the franchise he had been attached to since 1995 with Martin Lawrence. And while it wasn't a box office phenomenon, it proved one important thing. Will Smith still had an audience, still had people willing to buy tickets, still had people who hadn't abandoned him. The film's Hollywood premiere became a notable family image. Jada was there, Trey was there, Jaden was there, Willow was there, even mother-in-law Gammy was there. The entire Smith family standing together on the green carpet as a wordless statement that even if the outside world had changed how it looked at him, inside this family he was not alone. Will called Jada the real ride or die of his life, even after separation, even after entanglement, even after every scandal, even after 7 years living apart. And there was a strange sincerity in the way the two continued to appear together, without pretending to be the perfect couple anymore. In March 2025, he released the album based on a true story, his first studio album in nearly 20 years of silence on the music front. And right in the opening track, he directly referenced the Oscar incident, not avoiding it, not making excuses, laying it out in the music like a deliberately exposed wound. He signed a multi-film deal with Paramount Pictures through Westbrook Hollywood, including Sugar, Bandits, and Rabbit Hole, and had I Am Legend 2 in development with Michael B. Jordan along with The Council, Netflix's crime film where he would play drug lord Nicky Barnes. The schedule is getting busier, but no one, not even Will Smith, can be sure that the door has truly opened again, or is only cracking open just to slam shut once more. Because the real question is not whether he still has talent or not. That has never changed. The question is whether the world will allow him to come back. And the answer to that question is not in his hands. Before the slap happened, the healing journey had actually quietly begun. In 2021, he made the docuseries Best Shape of My Life on YouTube, starting as a weight loss project, losing 20 pounds in 20 weeks, but quickly turning into a psychological excavation when he discovered that the process of writing his memoir was forcing him to confront the deepest layers that the construction had hidden for so many years. He admitted on camera in front of his family that there was a time in his life when he had thought about ending it all. He turned to meditation, therapy, and according to what Jada shared in her memoir Worthy, the two had even experimented with ayahuasca as part of their journey to find themselves again. But the most bitter irony is this: he started the healing process before the slap. He was gradually peeling off the construction layer by layer, gradually learning to live without armor. And then right in the middle of that process of removal, when the protective layer thinned, the real person inside burst out in the worst possible way, on the worst possible stage, in front of the largest possible audience. In 2025, he said he was burning with the next creative phase, but the world was looking at him with different eyes now. When Will Smith appeared after the slap, still smiling, still cheerful on social media, still posting inspiring videos, the world called it fake, the construction trying to patch itself back together. When the storm passed, what remained was not the rubble, but what the rubble revealed underneath. Will Smith entered age 58, no longer the biggest box office star on the planet, no longer the perfect role model America once honored, no longer in control of the story the world told about him. But he was still a father, and at this age, perhaps that was the only title he really wanted to keep. His 3 children had grown up, and each had chosen their own way to carry the Smith name without being crushed by it. Trey, the eldest son from his marriage to Cherie Zampino, was now 33. He worked as a DJ and actor, but consciously stayed away from the spotlight, a choice only someone who had grown up in his father's enormous shadow could understand. The relationship between Will and Trey had come a long way since the painful years after the divorce. From the distance and trauma of the 2-year-old boy torn from his father, through many years of awkward searching for a common language, to the quiet but solid bond of 2 adult men who had learned that father-son love didn't need to be perfect to be real. Trey carried the name Willard, the 3rd generation with that name, the name Willard, both an honor and a burden, both a connection to the past and a reminder that the wounds of the previous generation always found ways to seep into the next, no matter how hard the bearer tried to stop it. Jaden, 27 years old, had chosen a completely different path. Rapper, actor, entrepreneur, and most recently creative director for men's at Christian Louboutin, a position that brought the entire Smith family to Paris to support him. Will and Jada flew to France together, appearing side by side as a statement that no matter how complicated things were between them, when their children needed them, they were still a united front. Jaden, like Shuao, wanted to carve his name with his own hands rather than live forever in the shadow of his father's achievements. And Will understood that more deeply than anyone, because he himself had spent his whole life trying to escape the shadow of the father he both loved and feared. Willow, 25 years old, was the most independent artist among the three. From the 10-year-old girl singing Whip My Hair to the young woman playing alternative rock, studying philosophy, co-hosting Red Table Talk, Willow seemed the least affected by her father's scandals, or at least the one who hid it best. The father-child loop ran throughout Will Smith's life like a never-ending sad melody. He grew up with a violent but present father at every fight, every play, every premiere. Will was not violent with his children but absent in so many irreplaceable moments because his career had swallowed his time. And now, at age 58, he was learning a lesson no script could teach, which was how to be present with his children without controlling, how to love without turning love into a project that needed managing, how to be a father without needing to be perfect. As for Jada, the relationship continued to exist in a gray area that no language was precise enough to define. In June 2026, the two were photographed having dinner with the family in Malibu. The first time appearing together after about 6 months, 4 hours sitting at the table with Jaden, Trey, and Will's mother. They had not officially divorced, but also had not moved back in together. Close sources said that Will and Jada loved each other and maintained a completely stable relationship, that everything the world saw was full support for their children, that they were proud of them. In 2021, Will said that marriage with them could not be a prison. In 2026, the marriage between him and Jada was not a prison, but it was not a home either. It was something in between, without a name, without precedent. And perhaps that was why it was the most honest version the two had ever had with each other. Will Smith at age 58 was no longer the construction. The construction had collapsed on the Oscar stage and was never rebuilt. Not because he didn't want to, but because the world had seen what was underneath and wouldn't let him pretend anymore. But what remained underneath the rubble was not the coward the 9-year-old boy had once feared. It was also not the hero he had spent 30 years trying to become. It was something in between, something more ordinary, smaller, less glamorous, but perhaps truer. Will Smith at age 58 still had joy, but it was different. It was no longer the joy of being unconditionally loved by the whole world, the joy of flawless perfection. It was the joy of a man who had been truly seen, with all his flaws, all his wounds, all his irreversible mistakes, and had to learn to live with all of that without armor. The construction had collapsed, but the question still hung in the air, what remained underneath, and the real person hidden behind that 30-year mask. Who was he really? Will Smith was the cleanest rapper in hip-hop history, and also the man who slapped his colleague live on global television in front of billions of viewers. He was the most perfect family role model America had ever honored, and also the man in a scandal-filled open marriage whose 7 years of secret separation no one knew about. He was Hollywood's safest star, the one every studio trusted with hundreds of millions of dollars, and also the boy carrying an unhealed family violence wound, the one who once stood at the top of the stairs, thinking about pushing his father down. Only remembering the brilliant achievements whitewashes the story and makes him less than human. Only remembering the mistakes is a profound injustice to the legacy he had spent his whole life building, because that legacy was not just awards and box office records. Will Smith had permanently changed the way Hollywood viewed black stars. Before him, black actors were locked in narrow boxes. Action films for black audiences, comedies for black audiences, black stories for black audiences. Will Smith broke all those boxes and proved that a boy from West Philadelphia could be the biggest star on the planet, not despite his skin color, but simply because of talent. And audiences of all colors on every continent were willing to line up to buy tickets to see him. He turned black actors from niche to universal, from action actors to leading men in every genre, comedy, science fiction, drama, biography, romance, and the door he opened for the next generation has never closed. The father-child loop ran throughout this story like a heartbeat, steady, relentless, sometimes painful. Will's father was violent but present at every fight, every play, every premiere. Will was not violent with his children, but absent in so many unrepeatable moments because his career had swallowed his time. And now, at age 58, he was learning the final lesson in the longest chain of lessons in his life. How to be present with his children without control. How to love without construction. Will once said he was a better father than a husband, and his life had proven both sides of that statement with equal bitterness. But perhaps the greatest success no golden statue could measure lay here. All three of his children had chosen their own paths. All refused to live in their father's shadow. All were writing their own stories with their own hands. Trey stayed away from the spotlight. Jaden demanded the right to fail and succeed on his own terms. Willow built an artistic world, nothing like her father's. They didn't need construction. And perhaps that was proof that even though Will Smith had been wrong in so many places, he had been right in the most important place, which was not passing on his own fears to the next generation. The tragedy of Will Smith lay in the fact that the world only allowed him to be perfect. But now, after all, the childhood wound that never fully healed, 30 years of non-stop crafted construction, the slap that destroyed everything in 3 seconds, scandals that tore apart every private curtain, 7 years of secret separation the world didn't know, 10 years banned from the Oscars, and the 58-year-old face with more wrinkles and less certainty. After all, the smile was still there. It just meant something different. The smile at 20 was a conquering weapon, the thing that opened every door and made the whole world want to stand on his side. The smile at 40 was a mask to hide, the final coat of paint on the wall of the construction, so perfect that no one suspected the cracks inside. The smile at 58, perhaps for the first time in his life, was simply a smile, not a weapon, not a mask, not construction. Just a man who had been through it all and was still standing here. Not perfect, not invincible, not the legend the world once believed, but also not the coward the 9-year-old boy had once feared. Through every brilliant victory, every painful loss, every public mistake, and the unrelenting passage of time, the question was no longer whether Will Smith could make the world believe he was perfect. The question was whether he could finally allow himself not to be perfect. His legacy was not in the Oscar he won or the slap that followed right after it. That legacy lay in every black child who had looked at him on screen and believed that a boy from West Philadelphia could become the biggest star on the planet. And in every person who had witnessed him fall and realize that even the biggest star on the planet, when stripped of everything, was still just a boy trying to make his mother proud. When you think about Will Smith, what comes to mind first? The brightest smile Hollywood has ever known, the slap that shocked the world, or the man standing behind both? Share in the comments below and help us honor the man who dared to live both the light and the darkness in front of the whole world. If this story touched you, please hit subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories that we put so much heart into telling. Thank you for being here until the very end. See you in the next video.